First of all, I'll just say a bit about myself. I was brought up Roman Catholic with a deep sense of the mysterium, the mysterious, holy other that's in a sense beyond rational comprehension. So I was really given that sense of spirituality, that sense of mysteriousness of the Catholic Church. And I remember as a child going to mass with my parents, and I remember the incense and the lighted candles and the subdued light, and there was just something very mysterious about it, and it had a tremendous impact on me. So that's one aspect of what I remember about my upbringing as a Roman Catholic. Also, along with the mysterium, I learned the importance of social justice, social action and justice. Both my parents had a strong orientation to social justice. My father lived it quite concretely in his work with refugees. With my mother, it expressed itself through her strong intellect and her efforts to communicate to the church or to the media, her sense of injustice when she witnessed it happening. As a child, these two dimensions shaped my upbringing, and they were interconnected with my parents and the Roman Catholic Church. My indigeneity was on my father's side. His grandmother was Inklakatma, and his father was a respected elder among the Indigenous peoples of the Fraser Canyon in British Columbia. However, my father, because he grew up in Kamloops and not on the Boothroyd First Nation, he suffered from racism and lived a deep sense of shame of his Indigenous roots. This manifested in his racism toward his own people, racism in the way he thought and how he often communicated these thoughts to his children, but never in terms of his profound respect for our Indigenous relatives and his empathy for the poor and suffering, Indigenous or not. I believe that it was his own suffering from discrimination that led to his deep compassion for those who are marginalized in our society. My father lived an ambiguity in terms of his indigeneity. I have spent the past 15 years or so connecting to my Indigenous roots through concrete experiences, visiting the Fraser Canyon, walking on the land of my great-grandmother and my grandfather, meeting relatives that I didn't know about until I started this journey. But also the journey involved reading other persons' experiences of their indigeneity, hearing teachings from many different Indigenous traditions, experiencing ceremonies, making drums, making sacred rattles and moccasins, being privileged to be part of circle work, healing circles and teaching circles. This journey and my experience brought me up against the wall that was the Roman Catholic Church's involvement in the Indian residential schools, and the question of why so many Indigenous people in Canada continue to be Christian. This is a question that I pose to myself, and I pose it to a course I teach at Concordia, to the students at Concordia when I teach a course called Indigenous Spirituality. What I have come to learn is that Indigenous Christians offer the churches the gift of reconnecting to the roots of Christianity, roots that many Western forms of Christian faith seem to have lost. There is a term in theology called enculturation. So the prefix "in" reminds me of the incarnation of God in the person of Jesus. And the root culture takes into account the richness and variety of human cultures. So this enculturation evokes, I think, a mysterious encounter between the gospel of Christ and the different peoples that the gospel was planted in. Achille Peelman, in his book, Christ was an Amerindian, he speaks about the gospel as the seed that was planted in the soil, which was the receiving culture. The soil is the receiving culture. The role of the sower or the missionary is secondary here. But what's important is to distinguish between what the missionaries wanted to achieve and the types of Christianity developed by the indigenous people themselves. And I think that I love that image of the seed and the ground as the culture, and the seed as the gospel, and how it grows and manifests so differently in different cultures. Achille Pillman, and I'm just quoting him here, he says, "We must recognize that the reception of Christianity by a large number of Amerindians, their yes to Christianity, was indeed a sublime form of rejection of Christianity, at least in its Western cultural expressions. Their yes was also a no. This is why any critical study of the encounter between Christianity and North American Native peoples must examine not only what the churches have given to the Amerindians, but also what the Indians did with and to Christianity." End of quote. So what strikes me about this is this sense of the Christic mystery, the seed that was planted. And I think what's important about this is that it's not just a meaning in terms of a doctrine or even teachings, but I think of it as an encounter with the person of Jesus himself. And I think that this is, what I think many Indigenous peoples experienced was this encounter somehow with this person of Jesus. I just have another quote here from the Rainbow Spirit elders, who are part of the Australian Aboriginal theological group. They say that, quote, "We accept that God has spoken and continues to speak through the Christian scriptures. This God of the scriptures is known to Aboriginal people as the creation spirit, who speaks to us through the land. The land is like the scriptures. Sacred stories and signs are inscribed on the landscape and readily available to those who can read them." End of quote. So from an Indigenous perspective, no Christian church or shrine could possibly generate the spiritual power associated with Indigenous people by Indigenous people with specific sacred sites or specific places or land. And I want to give a concrete example of an Australian Indigenous artist named Shirley Purdy. Shirley Purdy is Roman Catholic, and they're in the Roman Catholic Church. They have something called the Stations of the Cross, and if you're not familiar with them, they're basically stations or places in churches, in the Catholic churches, where they follow the journey of Christ from his trial to his crucifixion. And so what Shirley Purdy did is she actually made Stations of the Cross, but the material she used was from the earth itself. It was the ochres that are primarily natural pigments and minerals found in the soil or even in charcoal. So she used this material to create her Stations of the Cross. And what's interesting here is that Indigenous spirituality is shaped not by the sky for her, but by the shapes and forms of the land that convey the narrative of divine action. This is a radical revisioning in comparison to the Western European imagination, where God, heaven, and the angels are always depicted as floating above the realm of human drama. Her Stations of the Cross approximate the experience of walking and making contact with the material of the ground that we traverse. This is amplified by the narrative of this work, as it signifies Jesus's journey of suffering, as I said, from his trial to his crucifixion, the suffering that's depicted in terms of the surface of the ground upon which he walked. For Purdy, this is how she expressed it. So Purdy uses the story of Christ to express the journey of her own people through death to new hope. And what's interesting in Purdy's Stations of the Cross is she adds an extra one, a 15th station. And what that is, it's actually the resurrection. And what's interesting is that is not depicted in the Western versions of the Station of the Cross. So I think that she, because of that, this kind of movement from that she wants to express of her own people through death to new hope, from in a sense of a dislocation, the dislocated situation of her own experience and her people's experience in the late 1960s, to a community that came together and set up a bilingual school and began to build a strong culture, a retelling of traditional stories, while educating the young in skills to shape their contemporary existence. So she in her Stations of the Cross and in her life, she tried to communicate that experience of going from dislocation to being strongly grounded in her own culture. Transcendence in Aboriginal culture has to do with the surface of the land as a skin through which the dreaming stories are made present. Purdy's work moves religious authority from the written text of the missionary to the relationships with the land sustained by the local Indigenous community. I will end with another Indigenous Christian's witness, Mark MacDonald, former National Indigenous Anglican Archbishop of Canada. Mark MacDonald says that the gospel message is not a foreign construct added onto Indigenous spirituality and tradition. Rather, it is and has been assimilated into Indigenous cosmology and used as a supportive way to resist the evil that threatens Indigenous tradition and identity. Mark draws his inspiration on a passage from the Gospel of John. And I'll just say this passage. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and without him, not one thing came into being. What has come into being in him was life, and the life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. So what Mark MacDonald says is that the Creator, from this passage, his interpretation is that the Creator has placed within history, within creation, a way of life that will ultimately triumph over evil. In the context of Indigenous life and history, the evil that will be overcome is the colonization of peoples. For MacDonald, we need to listen again, to try to understand not what we've always heard when we listen to the gospel, but what is being said. And for Mark, it's intricately related to justice. What is very clear, he says, is that there has to be justice for Indigenous peoples. And I'll just finally end with Patty Krawiec, who wrote a really interesting book called Becoming Kin, Unforgetting Our Past in Order to Move into the Future. I don't think I have that title quite correct. But she said, I think Christianity has the potential to liberate, to actually help us Indigenous people reject colonial ideas. So I find this a powerful statement that Krawiec is making. And I guess just this my own journey in terms of coming to terms with my Indigenous roots and my Christian roots, that they somehow are not disconnected, that they somehow can be connected, and that my indigeneity actually enhances my Christian understanding, deepens it, takes it back more to its roots. So thank you.
Thank you, Christine. Dr. Jameson. I'm going to pass it over, but I just want to say you actually quoted a number of people's books, ratings, and I forgot to perhaps mention that you have a book of your own that will be coming out not too long. Do you want to give us the title?
It's called Three Lodges, Christava and Lonergan Encounter Indigenous Spirituality.
All right, great. Thank
So,
you. Yeah, sounds good. Thank you.
yeah.
Thank you again very much, Dr. Jameson. We move now to Boston, the Ferté, and Boston's in Victoria. And Boston, if you would please go ahead, that would be wonderful.
Okay, thank you very much. I really appreciate the invite, and thank you to all the students that are here. I would not choose an 8 p.m. panel for any sort of assignment, but so I appreciate that you've done it and you're here listening to me talk, which feels a little silly next to someone like Christine and Ray, but I'm going to do my best. So, yeah, really thinking about the two questions that Matthew posed to us over email. Are there unique gifts that Indigenous Christians in general, or you and your kin in particular, offer the church? And so I had some trouble with this one because it's kind of, I think when we think about a question like it's like, of course, every individual, every nation, every group of people has something that they can offer to the church. But I think that, especially as leaders in churches, that we need to kind of, I think we need to reframe this question a little bit. We need to kind of flip it on its head because I think this kind of question gets asked a lot. I've heard it asked a lot, not only about Indigenous people, but also about like Black and people of color, 2S LGBTQ plus, sort of what can they offer us? But I think that we need to flip it on its head and think about what the church generally and every denomination can think about this, what we can offer to those groups of people. Because I think that when we frame the question in this way, it creates a sort of this idea in, especially I've heard it among sort of older parishioners, where it's sort of the idea is just getting people through the doors. We just want people to fill the seats, and we want a visual representation of, here's a group of Black people, here's a group of Indigenous people, people of color, 2S LGBTQ plus. But in many ways, I think that we can end up damaging relationships further between the church and different groups of people when all we're concerned about is sort of getting them through the door. And so I would think about it in a way of what the church can do, and can offer sort of marginalized groups of people. We can start by creating safe spaces and just sort of supporting community initiatives. I don't know, it's really simple, but for example, Reverend Lyndon Sayers, he's here. He's my pastor at my church, but I did not grow up Christian. I mean, I was baptized Lutheran as a baby because my mom's family was Norwegian, but the type of Christianity in Northern Alberta, I don't know if I need to say much else. I'm sure you can imagine it's not a very inclusive, accepting group of people. It was very, anyone that called themselves Christian where I grew up sort of were the people that you wanted to stay away from. I moved to Victoria, BC with these sort of misconceptions in my head. And then I was at a protest for the Wet'suwet'en in 2019, everything that was going on. I was part of a group of people here called Indigenous Youth for Wet'suwet'en. We were organizing all these actions at the BC legislature. We were camping outside and sort of we disrupted the Crown speech and we did all these things. And there was like this priest out in the audience, and we were kind of all, Indigenous youth. We were kind of like, what's this priest doing here? Like, why, like that's good that someone's here supporting, but I was really, without realizing it even, it really sort of made me reflect on my own ideas of Christianity. And because where I grew up, that would never have happened. There would never be Christians in a space like that supporting things like Indigenous sovereignty. It just wouldn't happen. And so added Lyndon on Facebook and sort of started seeing his posts, started seeing things that Lutheran Church of the Cross was doing in the community. And I really, for the first time since I was a little baby, I decided, well, maybe I'll just try going to church, just see what happens. I'm not really comfortable with the idea, but I'll go and see. And I haven't stopped going since. I'm now in my third year of seminary, on track to be ordained in the church. And so, um, really, just by showing up and by showing support, it it changed my life. And I think that that's the way that we should be thinking about that question, rather than what can Indigenous or Black or people of color offer to the church. What can the church offer to them? And so the second question, well, okay, I struggled with both of them, I guess I can say that, because I also really struggled with this one. How do I reconcile this tension, or do I at all? It has been, I have struggled with this one a lot since I started going to church. Um, you know, again, think back to the Wet'suwet'en protest with these people, kind of like, oh, scoffing at the fact that there was this pastor showing up to these protests. That is kind of, I would say, in many ways, the general feeling, especially among young Indigenous people, about the church and Christianity. And so then in a year when I was going to church regularly and these people that I hung out with and I was doing these actions with were still in that same mindset, I really struggled for a long time. And I honestly just wouldn't talk about it at all. I would kind of, if something came up where, say, the Truth and Reconciliation Committee at Church of the Cross was asking, how can we support the Native Students Union? I was on the Native Students Union at University of Victoria for 3 years. They would say, we have this fund and we really want to support them. I would kind of bring it up and, I spoke to the head of this committee and whatever, and I wouldn't really talk about the fact that I went to church. Um, Eventually I did. It had very sort of differing reactions amongst my peers, I would say. Some were sort of like, what are you talking about? Why would you go to church? Like, this is, this institution and the pain that it's caused and this kind of thing. I also learned that a lot of people just do not care. And I was kind of overthinking it a little bit. I thought that my whole life was going to change and all the people I hung out with were going to change. And I also learned that most people just do not care. But it is a very, very real tension. And I think that, for one, I'll say I think that some people will never sort of accept the fact that, indigeneity and Christianity don't need to be so opposite and so separated. I don't, on either side of this question, I don't think that some people will ever accept that that can exist. But I think that also when we talk about indigeneity and Christianity, I think that we need to sort of talk about it in a way. The way that we talk about it right now is very separated. You're a Christian or you're Indigenous, or sometimes you can be an Indigenous Christian, like those of us on the panel. But and I think it creates again, this mindset amongst sort of general churchgoers that Indigenous worldviews and Indigenous spiritualities are completely separate, and that we can sort of associate or sort of incorporate some things sometimes, but that really those are two distinct groups. I don't think that has to be the case. I am in fourth year of the Indigenous law program at UVic, and a lot of that is learning traditional Indigenous legal orders. I'm in seminary. I'm on track to be ordained. I have seen countless examples over the years where Christianity and my own Indigenous worldview, my own Indigenous culture, they line up like perfectly. It could not fit better together. An example, the term Mokotuin. I don't know, Ray might have been was going to talk about this a little bit, so I apologize if you were, but the term Mokotuin, it's sort of popularized, I think, a little bit in academia now. So maybe many people here have heard it at least once or twice, but it's really a term for Cree and now Métis people that encompasses the relationships between all things. And it's the idea that all things, the animals, the plants, the waters, the rocks, everything has a spirit. and that we have a responsibility to teach and care for all of our relations. And at the same time, all of our relations have the responsibility to teach and care for us. I was reading passages like about a month ago, and I found this one from the book of Job. Job is sort of arguing with his friend Zophar about his suffering and his situation. And sort of in response to Zophar saying, well, there's no way that God could have done this to you. There's just no way. Job says, but ask the animals and they will teach you, the birds of the air and they will tell you. Ask the plants of the earth and they will teach you, and the fish of the sea will declare to you. Who among all these does not know that the hand of the Lord has done this? In his hand is the life of every living thing and the breath of every human being. I was like, that is the most concrete sort of example of Wakoto in that I have ever seen. Yeah, thank you, Matthew. And that's in scripture. That is not some article by an Indigenous author. That's in our scripture that we recite every Sunday. And so I think that we think about these two things, Christianity and indigeneity, as being totally separate, but I really don't think they are. And I think that if we sort of reframe it and we start to talk about it in a way that it is not separate, I think that that will also help the tension. I know someone who has done a lot of this is Dr. John Burroughs. I'm in field school with Rama First Nation, so we basically in the Indigenous law program will go to a community and we'll do legal work for them, and then we'll go and present our research. And we may occasionally go and visit the community while we do the work. And when we were in Rama in September, Dr. John Burroughs was there, and he was talking with us about the Sweat Lodge and giving us some different teachings. And I kind of went up to him afterwards, and because I had had a lot of people sort of I wasn't going to participate in the Sweat Lodge because anything over like 10 degrees, I'm sweating and dying, and I can't handle it. I get sick. So I said, okay, maybe I won't participate in the sweat this time. And classmates were coming up to me like, oh yeah, of course, we forgot the Christian thing. Like, of course you wouldn't be participating. No worries. And I was like, no, like that's not actually it at all. I don't think that this is sort of opposed in any way. And so I went up and talked to Dr. Burroughs about that. And he, for those of you who don't know him, he is a Mormon, but he's also a sort of world-renowned Anishinaabe legal scholar. And he's the one who started the Indigenous law program. He's doing something similar in Toronto right now. And a lot of his work, a lot of his writing has to do with, sometimes he does it sort of subtly and sometimes not so subtly, talks about the ways that Christian and sort of Canadian generally, those worldviews can sort of mix and strengthen Indigenous worldviews and vice versa. And so, yeah, that's sort of, I did not write anything down. Matthew told me, yeah, you don't have to write a script. So I did not. So I hope that made sense. But yeah, I think that is where I will leave it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Boston. And I just want to say you started off saying something about the esteemed company that you have on the panel, and of course you do, no question about that. But I want to assure you that that your experiences really place you in that group. It's really, really valuable, and thank you for those really, really valuable words and insights. So thank you.
Thank you.
And I want to then turn to Ray Aldred. All three of our panelists have already been introduced. I'll just say that Ray is a dear friend as well, and so I'm thankful to have him on the panel this evening. And I'll pass it over to you now, Ray.
Okay, here's I got it. I'll try to be really quick. Anyways, so the unique gifts that Indigenous Christians in general or you and your kin offer. So what I thought immediately was a paper I heard Mark McDonald give, and in it he called it "The Gospel Comes to North America." And what he said was that the Indigenous Church, the gospel might finally come to North America. with the Indigenous church, because it was the Indigenous church was the only church in Canada and in North America to actually hold the land that was sacred. So then so then I thought it was I thought it was cool that the gospel might finally come to North America, because we've had 400, as Richard Twist said, we had 500 years of bad haircuts so far, and maybe the gospel could finally come to North America. So that was one thing I thought of immediately. And because you see, in the Indigenous context, you see, they really helped the church to see the invisible and the visible, to hold them together, you know, that Aquinas is trying to do. But Indigenous people really help the church to hold things, the invisible and the invisible, the visible and the invisible in the real world, to hold them together. Because our scientific worldview keeps us from seeing things. And then I also thought that it helped in the process of understanding and embracing creation as the place where we encounter the Creator. It's not someplace else, that there is no life apart from creation. Like, there's no life apart from the land. Like, there is none. So, because I mean, I heard a podcast about, those guys post-human thinking, like I'm thinking, it's just bizarre. It's just bizarre. They talk about there's life somehow apart from creation, and I just always think that's so bizarre. And so keep people's feet planted to the earth, literally. And the smaller thing was the ability to hear the story and see the gospel story taken into Indigenous stories. So I remember in my thesis, I said that the gospel story becomes part of the story bundle, which freaked lots of people out because, for different reasons. But I just thought that was something that the Indigenous Christians or Indigenous people could do or help to do. And they also understood how healing is needed in the world more than punishment, coming out of the TRC, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. But that's just a general understanding that, you needed to be seeking reconciliation, that you weren't you couldn't punish your way into a better world. Like that's just not going to work. And of course, many of these are captured in the idea of making treaty, which, Matthew, that was kind of what we were trying to do in that little book that we wrote, that to invite the newcomers into a relationship with the land so they can be taught by the land, and that we could live in a better way. Like I thought that came out of Indigenous identity. That we were trying to give the newcomers the kind of Indigenous identity. And that's debated by some. And I've never been trying to hold people apart. We're trying to get somewhere, a good way together. So that was the first one. And then the second one, I was going to try out, I got a little draft here of that book I told you about, Why I Stay. So I just pasted a draft, and I'll just give it to you, and, then everybody can critique the hell out of it. And, I'll feel bad, but it's okay. I think I'm strong enough today. Anyways, here it is. So, November 21st, 2023, I took a tour of the Desmond and Leah Tutu Legacy Foundation in Cape Town, South Africa. The exhibit walked me through the life and times of Desmond and Leah, and I was struck by how Desmond and Leah embraced faith as the reason they strove so hard to see justice prevail in South Africa by working to end apartheid. I was also struck by a comment by a Black theologian who noted that in the midst of the apartheid, many Black and colored people of color in South Africa were angry at the Bible and Christianity. They believed that it was the Bible that had conditioned them to be subservient in South Africa, and that it was Christianity that was used to oppress them. While it's true, I was struck by the comment, while it is true that South African apartheid regime tried to use Christianity to justify apartheid, Desmond Tutu pointed out that it was because of the gospel that he and Leah were working so hard for justice. It was because people of color embraced the true gospel, which is radical and calls for transformation of power structures and the inequality that Tutus continued to work for the abolition of apartheid and to strive for truth and reconciliation. And I was struck as I toured the Tutus exhibit that Christ and the church continued to be central to who he was. And I realized that for me it is the same. Jesus Christ and the church are the reasons that I continue to work and to do the things that I do to try and restore and maintain the harmony that Creator has founded creation upon. As a First Nations person from Canada, you cannot take a tour of the South African exhibition of apartheid and not begin to think about the many oppressive acts that happened in Canada. The residential school aimed at annihilating any relationship or memory of what it means to be Cree. Well, and to what it means to be Cree is similar to the Bantu education aimed at Black children to keep them subservient to the whites. You cannot help but think about the District 6 removals. You can't help but think about the District 6 removals and not think of the removals of the Siesi Dene and other Indigenous people from their land to places where they were cut off from their land and their culture. You cannot look at the wall of victims of apartheid and not think about the unmarked graves of children and the unfound missing and murdered Indigenous women. In South Africa, there was anger and it took aim at the Bible and Christianity that had been seen as that had been seen at keeping Black South Africans down. Many oppressed South Africans believed they needed to fight against the imposition of the Bible and Christianity. This made me think that this made me think also about the anger that exists and why wouldn't there be anger? It is at this point that I notice that many, out of frustration, throw away the church and Christianity. I cannot say that I blame them. Some of these try to hold on to faith in Jesus and even the Bible. Others not only cast aside the church, but Jesus as well as the Bible. So why do I stay? That's what this book is about. I am reminded of a couple of other stories. First, I was traveling with Archbishop Mark MacDonald, and we stopped at Gitlick Damax or Greenville to show their new Nisga'a government building. We wanted to look at their new government building, but also say hello to the elders. They then talked to us for 20 minutes about the need to teach the younger people the church, what the church and the gospel had become, and that, or how the church and the gospel had become part of Nisga'a culture. A few days earlier, we were at an Advent event put on by the Killer Whale Clan in another community. And there, one of the elders observed that the young people go away to university and they come back and they hate the church. The church was used by the government, but the church was not solely to blame, he told us. He said young people needed to be taught this reality, or so he thought, anyways. And I remembered again that many just are tired of the church and its message because the church gets it wrong so many times. Yet I stay. Why is that? The other story was when I was in New Zealand talking with a friend of mine, or Daniel Twist, his father Richard Twist, and I did ministry and began working on our doctorates in 2004. And Elaine and I were visiting Auckland while I was on sabbatical. And we had a chance to visit Daniel and catch up. He's an amazing young man. And as we talked, he was struck by the fact that Elaine and I continue to be part of the Christian church. I'm ordained in the Anglican Church of Canada, and we work with the church and continue to preach and study the scripture and train clergy and leaders. And I am not alone. There are many of us who are part of the church and are working to spread the gospel and to work toward justice for Indigenous people. Ours was a message that we could be fully Christian and fully Indigenous. Daniel gave voice, however, to the reality that many of our children, Daniel pointed out that he and many had given up on the church and Christianity. I asked one of my own children if this was the case, and she pointed out that as our children, they had seen all the hypocrisy of the church, how the church paid us so little, even though she said, how the church paid me so little, even though I worked so hard, that they saw the church criticize, condemn, promise, and break promises. They had felt the sting of the hierarchy demanding more for less, and the children just walked away. Why then should I stay? Perhaps this will turn into a book that causes me to reconsider my stand. In writing the book, I'm not trying to justify my actions, but no doubt there will be reasons that I have not thrown everything out. Many of them are theological, but all of them are very human answers, my answers to why I stay. I guess I hope that people will find it interesting read. Maybe they find it encouraging and it helps them to be a better human being. I'm not trying to convert anyone, although maybe transform us to be able to work closer together. I am concerned to cast a vision of unity in society that does not break down into some kind of imperialism or sectarianism. Somewhere along the road, I think I gave up the need to see people converted to my way of thinking. I try to persuade people about a way of seeing the world, but I just wanted to help us be better. And be better at what we think creators made us to be. Of course, if you think you're supposed to dominate the world, you won't find much help from me. I thought the journey in life was to be a true human being, a creature of the Creator made to live in harmony with all things and all creatures, and to draw forth from the earth what was best. That I think is at the heart of my Indigenous spirituality. And maybe that's why I want to write this book. I stay because I'm a human being who has found help, and I'm trying to help others. So that's my draft of the introduction.
Boy, I'm looking forward to that book.
Yeah, me too.
That's a perfect segue. Thank you, Ray. That's a perfect segue, Christine and Boston. I invite you and Ray, all three. I'll say this for the sake of the students also right now, that what I'd like to do is open it up to the panelists first to just be able to chat among themselves briefly. And we'll give a few minutes for that and then open up for questions from students as well, and others who may be attending. Garion will give us some sort of advice about how best for the Q&A, how that will run. But for right now, if you folks want to chat amongst yourselves about anything you heard or said, please go ahead.
I just want to say thank you to both Christine and Ray, and especially Ray, that introduction, the question, why do I stay? It's not something I've asked myself yet, but maybe one day. But it's probably the biggest question that I think I get as a young Indigenous person going into ministry is how could you go into ministry in an institution that has caused so much harm to Indigenous people? I think it's a good question, but usually my response is like, if I was going to stay away from any institution that has done harm to Indigenous people, I couldn't be a lawyer, I couldn't be a doctor, I couldn't be a nurse, I couldn't be a pastor, I couldn't do anything in Canada. Everything
that's
has,
good. That's good.
yeah. So I just want to say I appreciate that, and yeah, it's a question that I get a lot.
Yeah. Christine, why do you stay?
Well, I feel that I'm kind of stay and I kind of don't stay. I sort of feel that I live a kind of a dialectic in a sense, but I also, I mean, one of the things that I've been kind of reflecting on a lot lately is how my Indigenous roots, that important word roots, have really rooted me in an experience that I never really had before. Because I think Ray, that I've talked to you about this, and Matthew, that I come from an armed forces family, and the importance of that rootedness is really something that I've come to discover more and more. And just that idea of belonging and being rooted, and the importance of memory. So these are things that I've come to really love and about in terms of my Indigenous roots. But there's also something about my Catholic roots that I always remember. There's this Joan Didion. I don't know if Joan Didion is an American writer, but there was a book of essays that she published called "Slouching Towards Bethlehem," and one of the one of the essays was titled, "I Can't Get That Monster Out of My Mind." And I think about the church that way, that I always remember one of my professors saying, when I was studying theology, one of my Catholic professors who was a priest saying, the church is a mother and a monster. And I thought that was so interesting to kind of describe it that way. And that's when I kind of thought, yeah, I can't get that monster out of my mind. It's so much a part of who I am. It's in my DNA in a sense. What I tried to express that a little bit when I talked about that mysterium, that mystery of the church that gave me that sense of mysteriousness. And also I think that it's important to differentiate between the institution and the word and the person of Jesus, and I tried to talk a little bit about that too. I feel that is something that I'm trying to grapple with myself. I mean, when the Pope made his apology, both in Rome and then when he came to Canada, he always kind of insisted that it was a few bad people that were the problem, but he never really acknowledged the complicity of the institution itself. And I think that was a mistake. I think that there's a systemic evil that infiltrates institutions sometimes, and I think that's happened to the Christian church. And but again, I think the institution and the word of the gospel, the word of Jesus, I think it's important to differentiate between those things somehow.
Yep. Yes. Hey, have you seen Radner's book, A Brutal Unity?
No.
So
Okay.
he makes a case. He's criticizing the Catholic scholar. Oh, I forget which one he's criticizing. Because there's a Catholic scholar who says violence is not, that's the secular society imposing that on the church. And so Radner just goes through and says, I don't think so. Because Radner was in Rwanda and other places. You probably knew him. He used to teach at Wycliffe.
Okay. Yeah, no, his name's very familiar. Yeah.
Anyways, it's a good book.
Yeah, I'll keep
It's
that in
hard.
mind.
I wouldn't buy it unless I was an academic, because otherwise it's
okay.
too hard to read.
Yeah. I'm getting beyond those hard books at this stage in my life.
Anyways, so
but
my doctor said I had a doctor. She was from Saddle Lake, and she said it's kind of a disturbing statement, but so I'm giving you a heads up. This is a disturbing statement. She said, "I think we always cuddle up to our abuser because we think we can make it different."
Yeah, that's interesting.
And
Wow.
we were riffing because we both said she hated hospitals and she was a doctor, and I hate school and I'm a professor.
Yeah.
And why is that? So.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah. But I was very struck by what you said, Boston, about the youth really scoffing at the possibility that the church or people that are part of the church could actually want to contribute something to be part of the demonstration or that kind of idea. And and I think that's really important to keep in mind that there is this reality. Like, it's easy to have these ideas, but I think what you kind of helped me to see more strongly, I guess, is this on the ground experience of young people and their experience of uh, especially Indigenous young people, I think, because the young people I work with at Concordia, I really find they're looking for deep meaning. They're looking for rootedness, what I talked about before. They're looking for a sense of belonging, for something meaningful in their lives. But it's interesting, and I wonder if Indigenous youth have that rootedness, and that's why maybe they don't need to have the church, in a sense. I don't know. What's your sense of that?
Yeah, I think so. And the rootedness, and all, yeah, I should have added that a lot of the anger is not unfounded, right? Like there's obviously a reason for it, and there's a good reason for it. because a lot of, my generation of people, parents, grandparents in residential schools, in day schools, like it's not just out of nowhere that they don't like the church. And so, but yeah, at least, especially out here on the coast, I have found, yeah, there is a really deep sense of culture and a really deep sense of spirituality. And yeah, unlike anything I've ever seen. I mean, we have here on just north of where I live, a little bit, like 20 minutes, there's an immersion school for the Saanich people. And so they learn their language, Senchofin, from kindergarten all the way to grade 12. They have courses in their language. And as maybe we all know, really the culture is in the language, and vice versa as well. So, yeah, I think it does come from a deep rootedness, a deep sense of their culture and spirituality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll come back on again then, and I'll just say we could open it up maybe now to questions from people who are attending. Gary and I maybe want to.
So what I think we can do for students is either raise your hand and I'll say, okay, this person, or write something in the chat and we'll go. And before we get to Eric, of course, it's you. Fantastic. Up first. I actually would also like to know if our panelists have any questions for our students. So as things unfold, let's make sure there's some time because you're all educators and you might have some questions for Sandvik students. Eric, you go ahead and unmute yourself, my friend. Go ahead.
I want to thank all the panelists first. I appreciate you guys spending your time with us tonight. I think any of you guys could answer this question, but I'm going to specifically target Boston here. You mentioned experiencing different reactions from your Indigenous peers when you started attending church. Could you share with us how you navigated those conversations and maintained your connection with your community?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I said a little bit about, like, at first I really did just avoid the conversation altogether. I did not talk about it at all. I went to church, and when things would come up about church, it was, oh, these Christian, I would just kind of, yeah, like, yeah, you're right. And meanwhile, I'm going to church every Sunday. But also, like I said, like when I finally started having the conversation, and I would kind of just sort of, insert a little bit. Oh yeah, when I was in church on Sunday, and kind of just, test the waters a little bit, see how people would react. I did find that many people really like didn't care, or they'd say, "Oh, I didn't know you went to church," and I would say, "Yeah," like, and okay, cool. Some people really did not care. The people that did really care, I mean, I don't know, because I'm not that old, and so especially when I started going to church, I was only like I was 18 years old, and so I, I think we all can agree when we're young, we don't handle certain things very well. And so if there was a negative reaction, I would kind of I'd kind of get my feelings hurt or whatever, and it would kind of cause issues. And, so some people I stopped talking to, or some people I kept talking to, but then I just knew that wasn't a topic that you brought up. Now in my life, I bring it up all the time. It's a huge part of my life is church and ministry and seminary. And so I talk about it, and if people I kind of let people decide their level of comfortability and what they want to talk about. If they have questions for me, that's great. I'll answer whatever question. If I say something and they just totally whatever, like, they don't want to talk about it, that's fine as well. And so I think it's really just I've tried to meet people where they're at in terms of those sorts of conversations. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Boston.
We do have a question in the chat from Rohan. Thank you. I want to ask Christine if she could elaborate upon Shirley Purdy's reinterpretations of the Stations of the Cross, and if she believes that the Roman Christian mythos is a microcosm of Indigenous spirituality or not. And I will say these first two questions, I'm sure they seem very impressive, and these are certainly two of our very impressive students from this intro course. And I hope this continues because we do have, it's a good group.
Yeah, well, thank you for that question. So, I mean, I just think what's important, and if you Google Shirley Purdy, Stations of the Cross, you'll find the image. And I think that, you know, what I find so stunning about what she's done is she's situated the the experience of Jesus, the experience of his, his trial, the experience towards his death and then eventually his resurrection, that she's interpreted through the concrete experience of her land, a place called, I'm just trying to, Warham. It's Warham. It's the county of Warham in Australia, where Shirley Purdy is from. And so, I just find that it's just shifted kind of that sense of this otherworldliness of the Christic, journey in a sense to something concrete and grounded in the land. And so Christ for Purdy is walking among her people. He's with her people on the land. He's walking on the land of her people. And that's what she's trying to communicate. I think in her version of the Stations of the Cross, whereas the kind of typical Stations of the Cross that you'll see in most churches are very otherworldly. They're almost like, again, you see the sky and you see the clouds in the sky, but you never see the ground that much. It's always sort of this sense of otherworldliness somehow that, and so I was really struck by that very much. And your other question, do I believe that the Roman Christian mythos is a microcosm of Indigenous spirituality? That's an interesting question. I'm not quite sure how to answer that. I think that I guess what I do believe is I believe that the early Christians, that Jesus himself, who was, he taught orally. He was an itinerant teacher. He wandered around on the land and taught orally. He didn't write anything down himself. And I think that's something that is interesting to juxtapose that in the oral traditions of most Indigenous peoples. And I think that in my sense of it, I think that when I think of Indigenous peoples receiving the word in a sense, I think that they received with that word, as I tried to express, the person of Jesus. So the Roman Christian mythos, the Christianity moving into a Roman interpretation, already is I think a sort of bracketing of, or kind of moving beyond that original message. And I think that original message is something that I think Christianity needs to somehow or other recover. And I, Boston had mentioned, well, not so much what Indigenous people have to give to the church, but what should the church do for Indigenous people? And I'm not sure, like, for my perspective, I think that the church, from the Western church, has done enough to Indigenous people. I feel that there needs to be a deep listening to what Indigenous people have to communicate. I think that and again, it's not to try to place too much burden on Indigenous peoples as somehow the saviors of the world. But I do believe that there is a teaching, an important teaching that the world desperately needs to hear from, and it comes from Indigenous peoples, because they're so grounded in a relationship, as Boston mentioned, all our relations, that Indigenous people are so grounded in the land and the waters and all creatures, and they understand, there's a deep understanding of our interrelatedness. and when there's a deep understanding of that, it's hard not to it's hard to treat creatures or beings as, you know, as just something that are a commodity that we can use. Anyway, I'm kind of getting off track here a bit, but I hope I sort of addressed your question a little bit, Rohan. Thank you.
Eric, I'm not trying to step over you here, but I just want to see if anybody else has a hand up or something they want to type in the chat. And then we will entertain another question from Eric. Or is your hand still raised from before, Eric? It's possible.
Oh, I do have a question. I was just waiting.
Oh, no, go for, I think go for it. Yeah.
My question's for Ray here. You shared a draft of your book with us, which I appreciate. I was just kind of wondering, like, you explore the tension remaining between like the Christian church and its harmful history. What do you hope readers take away from your personal journey, like throughout that?
I don't know. That's a good question. I'll be honest, I write for me, and maybe it has some kind of, I don't know. I think always the best writing you do for you, don't you? Like, I don't know. Mostly I always thought I was writing for my grandchildren too. I suppose I do write for them. I was just, I mean, it's just about the journey, and maybe people, maybe it inspires them. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe, I don't know.
I think
Yeah.
that writing for yourself is a beautiful thing as well, and I appreciate that answer.
So I just, and yeah, so that's what I was thinking. Most stuff I do now, I think about my grandchildren. So, and about the Indigenous church. But I just thought it would be, someone will do a study at some point. I just thought it'd be interesting because there was all of us who were doing, so this whole movement that started probably, it was like mostly, so for the trying to be native and Christian, like that was like, there's a book by James Treat edited a book, like, and it was written like in 94, and there's 20 some essays about holding, holding these things together. And that was the thing that was driving the conversation. So like, but that would really start in the 1970s, the Indian Ecumenical Conference. And, there was these two seminal works. One was called More Real Involvement by Vine Delory. It was a paper. And then there was a book written by a United Church minister called Beyond Trap Lines. And so then trying to hold these things together really came out of the and for mainline churches, like, they were trying to hold these things together. And that was my program, sort of was come out of that. And then there was another program that I helped start in the 2000s, and we were trying to do the same thing, hold together, you know, be fully Christian, fully Indigenous, and trying to hold these things together. And there was a bunch of us, Randy Woodley, myself, Cheryl Bear, Terry LeBlanc, but, most of our kids walked out of the church. And I just thought that's fascinating. Someone should go interview all those, they're all adults now. So just go ask them, why they didn't stay. Like that would be an interesting, someone who's smarter than me will do that. And I keep throwing that out there, hoping someone will say, hey, I'm going to do that. Sorry, I kind of got going there.
Thank you, Ray.
So we have a question in the chat, and I might ask for a bit of a qualification on it. So it says, I'm going to read it. How has Christianity changed how you and the people around you heal from colonization? Has the fact that the schools are made by the same community shaped how you heal? Now, Dominic, I'm going to challenge you to type out for me if you mean the schools are made by the same community or the people. Like, so are you thinking here Christianity also made the schools, or are you thinking like the people in the same community you're living in made the school? Do you know what I mean? Can you just the last little bit of this has confused me, but maybe I'll read it again, and it's possible our panelists. Okay, so I'm going to read it again. Apologies. How has Christianity changed how you and the people around you heal from colonization? Has the fact that the schools are made by the same community shaped how you heal? We mean people inside the community, not a movement as a whole. And that's for any of our panelists, I think. Christianity, community, the schools, and healing. And I'm assuming the schools here might refer to residential schools, but that's I would assume.
Hmm. Well, you know, the TRC was really on one level is the Indigenous Church is part of that. They're the ones putting this forward. Like I think many of the survivors were they were part of the church before they went into the residential schools. Like, and so like it's really hard to separate those two things. Like I should have made that clear. Like you can't separate Indigenous spirituality and the Christianity, the church, because man, most of our ancestors became part of it. And if they're not part of it, it was a reaction to what was going on. And I just think, man, that's like I tease people and I say, if you want to have pure Indigenous traditional spirituality, you're going to have to go to the university because that's the only place it exists. Because everywhere else, you know, like even the word for prayer in Cree, Imahow, the command is Imahow, is a word that comes into the language after interacting with the church. Like, so, and like there's no other word for prayer, like, I don't think. So that's kind of fascinating, I think, anyways. So it's not an answer, but it's just a fascinating thing.
Do any of the other panelists want to respond to this particular question?
Well, it's a good question. You know, I guess you know, I just from what Ray said, I'm thinking about how, you know, what do we learn from each other? You know, that moves us forward in a sense. You know, that I mean, Indigenous peoples have been invaded. Indigenous people on Turtle Island have been invaded by, you know, the Europeans, the colonizers, and but they also welcomed them, you know, and they wanted to be in relationship to them. And that's my understanding of what the two-row wampum means, is that, you know, we paddle side by side, and we do share something. And that's the idea of the lodges too, that we stay in our lodge, but we share with each other and we learn from each other. And I think that that's been going on, you know, for centuries. And but I think that you know, the healing that has to come is the racism and the denigration of the contribution that Indigenous peoples make and continue to make. And you know, but I as a Catholic, I don't think that, you know, I mean, I feel that there is a healing that has to take place in the Catholic Church, absolutely. But I keep kind of, you know, wrestling with that tension between the church as institution and the church as human beings. And when we encounter human beings, you know, it's different than thinking about this institution out there. You know, when we encounter human beings in the face-to-face encounter, our relationship with them, you know, I just think that there's something, you know, I mean, I think Boston talked about it when he encountered, I think it was Lyndon who came to the demonstration, and that experience of encountering this Christian, so, you know, Christian, and but this human being who was willing to make that effort to be part of this demonstration. And so you know, I wrestle with that kind of tension between human beings and institution, and, you know, and because, but I think, you know, I think we are both those realities, or, you know, that both those realities certainly shape me in my own upbringing and in my own experience now. But my experience, as I feel so much healing that's happened for me personally because of my Indigenous roots, because of my, you know, recognizing that, you know, I'm more than Catholic, I'm also Indigenous, and that those worlds are both important to me. But, you know, and they both have an important, you know, something important to teach to me, and both have something important in terms of my healing. So I don't know if I'm addressing that question very well, but anyway, there you go.
The chat is blowing up a bit, but Boston, I want to give you a shot at this one if you're interested.
No, I think yeah, I'll defer.
Great. That's always the best answer on a panel. People love that. I yield my time to yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have Xavier here. Question for anyone. In what ways can churches better coexist with Indigenous culture rather than forcing Western expressions of Christianity? And or how can someone with strong Indigenous co or identity coexist with Christian passage and values to further grow the connection between the two? Between the two historically disconnected cultures. Is there connections written in passage, or is it a deeper spiritual connection?
Hey, there's an essay by Sophie McCall called "What the Map Cuts Up, the Story Cuts Across," and the person was writing it because of the land. It was in response to the land claims case in the Wet'suwet'en land claims and like that whole debacle that happened in BC. But they identify this idea of collaboration. So then my understanding is what you're trying to do is you're trying to hold this. Andrew Wesley told me we're trying to hold these things together like this because the space in between us, that's for collaboration. That's what the two-row wampum was about. Like and that's what treaty's about. You're trying to hold these things together and make this space for collaboration, which is the same space you're trying to create as a storyteller, because you have the memory and the stories to the land that connected to the land, and that's the elders, the memory. And then you're trying to anticipate 7 generations. So then you have this anticipation that's there of how you're hoping, your hopes, and then you're in the present and you're trying to collaborate between these two things, trying to hold these things together. And that's how I think about it. But when I'm working, my father told me, look, I just assume everybody's committed and I go from there. So I don't spend a lot of time anymore trying to I just assume everybody's there because they want to work together somehow. So then I just that's how I approach it. So I'm assuming the church wants to be different. So then I kind of keep working away, trying to find some commonality and trying to get us to a better place. But lately, mostly what I do is we work through trauma. We're trying to work through the trauma. Because, when you face difficult things, you end up with, sometimes that clarifies things. You kind of see things better. But sometimes your vision is distorted, and trying to work through the distortions because it impacts how we see Creator, how we see each other, how we see ourselves. And so right now, that seems like mostly what we're doing.
Ryan would like to know if any of the panelists have a special place of spiritual significance. And Rowan has another question in the chat, but I'll come back to it because I'm trying to spread them around a little bit. Do any of you have a place of special spiritual significance?
Well, sorry, you go ahead,
No,
Boston.
no, you go ahead,
Well,
Kristen.
I'll just quickly say that for my people, the Nkakma people, the Stein Valley is an important sacred place. So it's a place where the Fraser River and the Thompson River comes together. And that in itself is sacred when the rivers come together like that. But the Stein Valley is many of the Nkakma people would go into the Stein for vision quests, and there's a lot of pictographs and petroglyphs there, and it's a very sacred place. And I've learned. One of my relatives said to me when I was in the Fraser Canyon a few years ago, he said, if you want to learn about our spirituality, you need to go to the Stein Valley. So that's just what I wanted to say about the importance of that.
I was just going to say, so my people, the Métis, we were and still are very sort of transient, really moving around all the time. And so I think that it's hard. I don't think there's really necessarily one place, especially if again we think about all beings as having spirit and all beings as having a relationship with us. And again, Job, all of us are in the hand of the Lord. I think that really every place is sacred in some way because we're always interacting with our relations on the land.
We have Rylan with a raised hand, so I'm going to go there. And again, I see Rohan, I see Eric. I'm going to come back to you, but Rylan, go ahead.
Yeah. So, again, thank you for being here tonight. This is a really great opportunity to hear from, a bunch of different voices. It's been really great so far. I just had a question. It's not really directed specifically at one person in particular, but I wanted to ask, um, what gives you hope for like the future of Indigenous Christianity? Like what? Yeah.
The other, I was FaceTiming with my grandson. He's just turned 6. I was FaceTiming and it's because it was just after, it was just before we were doing a TRC chapel at my seminary. And so I had an orange shirt on. His cookum, his grandma had her orange shirt on, and we're FaceTiming and he says he says, "Oh, I got an orange shirt too." So he runs and he changes his shirt and he comes back and he says, "I do this to honor the Cree," he says. And, and that gave me hope because when I was a kid, I would not have done that. I would not have done that.
Mm.
We're gonna probably end in just a few minutes, but I'm gonna really quickly try to get our last two questions in, if that's okay. So we've got Rohan wondering about the Job scripture so Boston referred to the story of Job, wondering if this is an example of Indigenous history for him, if you're reading possibly reading it that way. And I'm summarizing that. So sorry if it's not quite what Rohan was getting at, but I think that's the question.
Yeah, it's a great question. You're really, I have not done my level 1 exams in seminary yet, so you're really testing my God and suffering knowledge here and articulating that. So it's good. But no, I think that is, yeah, it's a great question. And I think that that's why Job is sort of one of the most popular. Like there are books in scripture that I have like 3 years into seminary have never even read a sentence out of. But Job is one that is people are coming back to all the time. And I think that's because so many people can relate to Job, whether it's on a personal level or on a community level, like you're saying. Sort of this, I mean, what really is in the book, like completely unnecessary and undue suffering for basically no reason. And the question of why is this happening to me? Why are you letting this happening? Why, sorry, let me rephrase. Why are you letting this happen, or why are you doing this to me? So, yeah, I think it can be sort of used as a, I don't know, what's the difference between it's not even late for me. It's only 5 o'clock, so I can't even use that excuse. But the difference between a metaphor and an allegory, I don't know what it would. But I think that, yeah, Job's situation can be used as one of those things for a lot of different examples in history, whether it is, yeah, Indigenous suffering or whatever. Yeah, I think it's yeah. I don't know if that was too. I'm not very good at ending questions sometimes, but yeah, I'll end it there.
Well, and on the topic of not always being very good at ending things, I think this is perhaps a good note to wrap things up on. Now I see Rylan and Eric's hands are still up, and I'm sure other people have many questions. But what I would say is maybe we can do something like this again sometime, because I think this was a helpful conversation, and from my perspective, I learned a lot, and I'm sure the students did as well. Dr. Anderson, do you want to say anything?
just to add my thanks, and I really, really appreciate our panelists. Thank you so much for your perspectives and your wisdom, and what a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Hey, can I make here's an advertisement. So I wrote this Advent resource it's a group called Alongside Hope. And they called it an Advent of Healing. So I wrote these 23 little reflections if anybody wants to check it out. If you just Google Advent of Healing and Ray Aldridge, you probably find it. And then you can it's like, I don't know. I just wrote some reflections. It was about healing. So
Great, great. Thanks, Ray.
Thank you.
Can we link that here, please? We will certainly post it on the Moodle. How about that? We'll make sure the students have access to it or can find it on the Moodle. So there's some bites there. Any other not self-promotion, because this is an excellent thing, but I always the slippage there is I always tell students I'm shamelessly self-promoting things. So I've put those words on people that aren't myself, and apologies for that. But would you like to plug anything else or promote anything else? I want to make sure you have the space to do that.
I'll just say that I put into the chat the link for Alongside Hope for Ray, the thing that Ray was just chatting about. And of course, Ray and I have a book called Our Home in Treaty Land. So there you are. That's a promotion. The wisdom is all Ray's, and the settler response is all mine. So there you are. Yeah. Great. Well, thank you so much again, folks. Really, really appreciate your time and the wisdom that you shared.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
And see you soon, I hope.
Okay.
Thank you,
Bye.
students. Thank you for being here.